Good evening, everyone. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and this is your federal crime report for the end of July of 2026. Tonight, we're taking you across the United States, examining major federal criminal prosecutions spanning the Great Plains and South Central region. These cases involve illegal immigration, child exploitation, violent crimes, firearm offenses, narcotic trafficking, fraud, and other serious violations of the federal law. Our reporting is based on information released by the United States Department of Justice and the respective United States Attorney's offices. We begin tonight in Montana, where federal prosecutors conclude several significant cases involving illegal re-entry into the United States and sexual exploitation of children. Federal prosecutors in Montana announced that Fabian Lopez Barragan, a 25-year-old Mexican citizen, has been sentenced to 211 days in federal custody after pleading guilty to illegally re-entering the United States. According to court records, Lopez Barragan had previously been removed from the country in 2019. Prosecutors said he unlawfully returned in 2020 without obtaining legal authorization. The case resurfaced after a traffic stop near Sidney, Montana on December 30th of 2025, when local law enforcement discovered the vehicle's license plate did not match the automobile being driven. During the traffic stop, officers questioned the validity of Lopez Barragan's driver's license and contacted the United States Border Patrol. Border Patrol agents determined he was unlawfully present in the United States following his previous deportation. United States District Judge Susan P. Waters accepted Lopez Barragan's guilty plea and imposed a sentence of 211 days in federal custody. Following his completion of the sentence, federal immigration authorities will once again remove him from the United States. Federal officials continue to emphasize that individuals who unlawfully return after deportation face criminal prosecutions in addition to removal proceedings. Federal prosecutors also announced one of Montana's most significant child exploitation sentences this month. 38-year-old Zachary Dean Schniffners of Forshee has been sentenced to 27 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release after pleading guilty to producing and possessing child sexual abuse material. Judge William W. Mercer imposed the sentence. Schniffner was also ordered to pay more than $55,000 in financial penalties, including restitution to the victim. According to prosecutors, the investigation began on Christmas Day of 2024 when a 14-year-old boy reported disturbing communication he had received throughout social media. Investigators say Schniffner requested sexually explicit photographs from the child, sent an image of his own genitals, and admitted he was interested in boys between the ages of 12 and 15 years old. The teenager instead sent fabricated images created from material found online. The disclosure immediately triggered a criminal investigation. Search warrants executed over the following weeks uncovered dozens of sexually explicit images and videos involving children, including material depicting children as young as 12 years old. Investigators also recovered evidence indicating Schniffner was contacted additional juvenile victims throughout social media using similar methods. Federal prosecutors described the investigation as another example of an successful cooperation between local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies working to identify online child predators before additional victims are harmed. Federal authorities also secure another illegal re-entry conviction in western Montana. Gabriel Jesus Portable Abrego, a 37-year-old citizen of El Salvador, was sentenced to 208 days in federal custody, which the court determined after already being served. Judge Diana L. Christians ordered Portable Abrego to be removed from the United States following completion of his federal proceedings. According to prosecutors, Portable Abrego had previously been deported in 2019 but later returned to the United States without authorization. His unlawful presence came to light after local law in Belgrade, Montana, stopped him for speeding and driving under the influence in March of 2025. Following his detention, Immigration and Customs Enforcement had determined he had previously been removed and had no lawful permission to re-enter the country. Federal officials say these prosecutions remain part of the ongoing effort to enforce federal immigration law against individuals who illegally return after formal removal. While Montana prosecutors focus on immigration enforcement and protecting children from online exploitation, neighboring South Dakota saw federal courts impose lengthy prison sentencing involving sexual abuse and violent crime committed in Indian County. Let's turn now to South Dakota. Federal prosecutors announced that Christopher Sand, 28, of Eagle Butte, had been sentenced to 3 years and 10 months in federal prison after being convicted of sexually abusing a minor. Judge Eric C. Shuttle handed down the sentence on July 27th of 2026. In addition to the prison terms, Sand must serve 5 years of supervised release and complete his sentence and pay mandatory assessment of Federal Crime Victim Fund. According to court records, the offense occurred during March of 2025 on Cheyenne River, Sussex Indian Reservation. Federal prosecutors stated that Sand, who was 27 years old at the time, engaged in sexual intercourse with a 13-year-old child. The case was prosecuted in federal court because of the offense occurred within federal judicial in Indian County. Authorities say protecting children remains amongst the highest priorities from both federal prosecutors and tribal law enforcement partners throughout South Dakota. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Dalton Hump, 34, of Faith, South Dakota. Following a federal jury trial earlier this year, Hump was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Evidence presented during the trial established that Hump unlawfully entered a residence in Zepatch County on July 10th of 2024 while inside Cheyenne River, Sussex Indian Reservation. During the burglary, prosecutors say Hump assaulted 2 occupants before ultimately being forced from the residence. Judge Eric C. Shuttle imposed the sentence on July 27th of 2026, concluding the federal prosecution. Federal officials noted that the violent crime committed within tribal lands often involve close cooperation between tribal police, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the FBI, and the United States Attorney's Office. We continue tonight in Wyoming, where a previous convicted felon attempted to flee law enforcement during a dangerous high-speed pursuit before discarding a loaded firearm along a public roadway. Then we'll head east to Nebraska, where federal prosecutors announced significant prison sentences in separate cases involving child sexual abuse material and large-scale methamphetamine trafficking. Federal prosecutors in Wyoming announced that Cameron Justin A.G., 31, was sentenced to 42 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. Chief United States District Judge Kelly H. Radkin imposed the sentence on July 28th of 2026 in Cheyenne. According to the court documents, the indictment unfolded on July 3rd of 2025 while law enforcement officers were executing a search warrant at a residence in Green River, Wyoming, during an unrelated investigation. As officers approached the property, they encountered Edgy, who had an outstanding arrest warrant. Authorities say Edgy immediately reversed his vehicle into an unmarked Wyoming law enforcement vehicle before accelerating away at high rates of speed. During the pursuit, investigators say Edgy threw the loaded .22 caliber pistol from his vehicle in a nearby intersection of Indian Hill Drive and Shesha Road. One of those firearms had previously been reported stolen. After a brief fleeing, AG returned to the original location and surrendered without further incident. Federal prosecutors noted that AG was legally prohibited from possessing a firearm because of a prior 2017 Wyoming burglary conviction, as well as multiple felony convictions in neighboring Utah. Judge Radkin sentenced AG to 42 months in federal prison to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. Federal officials say the prosecution underscores the Department of Justice's continued effort to remove firearms from the hands of convicted felons and reduce the threat posed by repeat violent offenders. From Wyoming, we move to Nebraska, where federal courts hand down substantial prison sentences in 2 separate cases involving exploitation of children and trafficking of dangerous narcotics. Federal prosecutors announced that Nicholas Wallenstein, 41, of Lincoln, Nebraska, has been sentenced to 84 months in federal prison after being convicted of receiving child sexual abuse material. United States District Judge Susan M. Bays imposed a sentence on July 30th of 2026. Following his prison term, Wallenstein must serve 5 years of supervised release and pay $21,000 in restitution. Federal authorities say the investigation began after multiple cyber tips were submitted involving online cloud storage accounts suspected of containing child sexual abuse material. The Nebraska State Patrol obtained a federal search warrant on online accounts. Investigators located 111 images and videos depicting prepubescent and pubescent children engaging in sexually explicit conduct. Further investigation linked the account to Wallenstein. Law enforcement then executed a search warrant at his Lincoln residence, seizing approximately 32 electronic devices. A forensic examination revealed that at least 9 devices contained child sexual abuse material. In total, investigators discovered approximately 189,805 illicit images and videos. Federal prosecutors described the volume of material recovered as an extensive and have emphasized the critical role of cyber tips continue to play in identifying offenders who will exploit children online. Federal prosecutors also announced one of Nebraska's most significant narcotic sentencing this month. Jennifer Swing, 49 of Lincoln, has been sentenced to 300 months, 25 years in federal prison for possessing methamphetamine with the intent to distribute. Judge Susan M. Bazin handed down the sentence on July 30th of 2026. Following her release, Swing must complete 10 years of supervised release. According to prosecutors, Swing had 2 previously convicted for serious drug felonies, significantly increasing her sentencing exposure under federal law. The investigation began during February of 2025 when Lincoln and Lancaster County Narcotic Task Force conducted 3 controlled purchases of methamphetamine using a confidential informant. Investigators documented multiple drug transactions before obtaining a court-authorized search warrant of Sung's hotel room. During that search, officers recovered drug paraphernalia, marijuana, and approximately 5 ounces of methamphetamine. Laboratory analysis determined the narcotics contained at least 130 grams of actual methamphetamine, a quantity carrying a severe penalty under federal sentencing guidelines. Federal officials said the case demonstrates the continued partnership between local narcotic investigation and federal prosecutions in disputing repeat drug traffickers responsible for distributing highly addictive controlled substances throughout Nebraska communities. Federal authorities say both Nebraska prosecution highlights 2 of the Department of Justice's highest enforcement priorities: protecting children from sexual exploitation and aggressively prosecuting large-scale narcotic traffickers whose criminal activities continue to fuel addiction and violence throughout American communities. Still ahead, in Kansas, federal prosecutors announced cases involving agricultural loan fraud, an armed bank robbery indictment, and a former United States Postal Service employee who admitted to stealing mail intended for local residents. Then, in Oklahoma, 2 repeat offenders received lengthy federal prison sentences after major drug trafficking, firearm, and witness tampering convictions. That's coming up next in our Federal Crime Report continues. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and you're watching Englebrook Independent News. Federal prosecutors in Kansas announced that Stephen W. Porkowski, 49 of Topeka, has pled guilty to conversion of mortgage collateral, admitting he illegally sold crops that had been pledged as collateral for a federal government loan. According to court documents, the fraud involved financing provided through the Farm Service Agency, a division in the United States Department of Agriculture. Federal prosecutors alleged that Porkowski sold crops secured that the government-backed loan without authorization, depriving the agency of collateral tied to the financial agreement. Porkowski is scheduled to be sentenced on November 3rd of 2026. A federal district judge will determine his sentence after considering the United States sentencing guidelines and other statutory sentencing factors. Federal officials say protecting taxpayer-funded agricultural lending programs remain an important priority, particularly in states where federal farm assistance programs support thousands of producers. A federal grand jury in Kansas City, Kansas, has returned an indictment charging Daniel J. Young, 41, with bank robbery and using firearms during a crime of violence. According to prosecutors, Young allegedly entered a bank on Brown Parkway during June of 2026, banished a firearm, and used intimidation to force a bank employee to surrender money. No trial date has yet been announced. As with every federal indictment, the charges are allegations only, and every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law. If convicted, Young could face significant federal prison time because of the firearm allegations accompanied by the robbery charges. Federal prosecutors also announced that Amanda Tucker, 48, of Scott City, Kansas, has pled guilty in the theft of mail by a postal employee. According to court documents, Tucker worked at a mail carrier of Scott City Post Office. Investigators executed a search warrant at her residence in August of 2025, where they recovered numerous United States Postal Service letters and parcels that had never been reached to the intended recipient. Authorities also located additional under-delivered mail in Tucker's personal vehicle. Federal officials emphasized that postal employees occupy positions of public trust and that any theft involved in the United States mail system is treated as a serious federal offense because it undermines confidence in one of the nation's oldest public institutions. From Kansas, we move south to Oklahoma, where federal judges impose lengthy prison sentences in two major cases involving methamphetamine trafficking, illegal firearm possession, and attempted to obstruct criminal investigations. Federal prosecutors announced that William Gray, 31, of Oklahoma City, has been sentenced to 300 months, that's 25 years, in federal prison. Gray pled guilty to possession of methamphetamine with the intent to distribute and being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. Chief United States District Judge Scott L. Palk imposed the sentence on July 27th of 2026. According to court records, the investigation began in June of 2025, where law enforcement arranged an undercover purchase involving approximately 2 pounds of methamphetamine. Authorities identified Gray as the driver of a delivery vehicle. When officials attempted to approach him, Gray fled. The following day, investigators recovered nearly 2 pounds of methamphetamine discarded in the neighborhood throughout which Gray fled. Surveillance video allegedly captured Gray throwing the narcotics from his vehicle while attempting to evade police. Several days later, officials executed a federal search warrant at Gray's residence. During the search warrant, investigators recovered additional methamphetamine along with 5 firearms. Court records indicate Gray had multiple prior felony convictions, including offenses involving stolen vehicles, attempting to elude police, illegal firearm possession, and other serious crimes. Judge Polk said the lengthy sentence reflects the seriousness of the offense, Gray's criminal history, and the need to protect the public from future criminal conduct. Following his prison sentence, Gray will serve 5 years of supervised release. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Isaiah Antonio Ortiz, 27, of Oklahoma City. Ortiz received 120 months, that's 10 years in federal prison, after a jury convicted him of being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm and witness tampering. United States District Judge Patrick R. Wyrick imposed the sentence on July 27, 2026. According to prosecutors, the investigation began following an October 14, 2024 assault outside a metro area business. Authorities allege Ortiz struck another vehicle, shattered the driver's side window, and displayed a long-barreled firearm before fleeing the scene after noticing surveillance camera. Law enforcement later executed a search warrant at Ortiz's residence, recovering a firearm believed to have been used during the incident. While awaiting trial, prosecutors said Ortiz repeatedly attempted to persuade witnesses to falsify claims of ownership of the firearm and deny that Ortiz knew about it inside the residence. Those actions resulted in additional federal witness tampering charges. Federal prosecutors noted Ortiz's criminal history includes previous felony convictions involving eluding law enforcement, drive-by shooting offenses, unlawful firearm possession, rioting, attempting second-degree arson, and malicious destruction of property. Judge Wyrick stated that protecting the public, deterring future violent crimes, and Ortiz's lengthy criminal history has significant factors supporting the decade-long federal sentence. Ortiz will also serve 3 years of supervised release following the completion of his prison term. Federal officials say both Oklahoma prosecutors demonstrate the Department of Justice continue focus on prosecuting repeat violent offenders whose criminal conduct involves narcotic trafficking, illegal firearm possession, witness intimidation, and attempting to evade law enforcement. Still ahead on our special report, we'll travel to Texas, where federal prosecutors secure a major drug trafficking conviction connected to international smuggling organizations responsible for importing more than 10,000 kilograms of methamphetamine into the United States. We'll also examine the sentencing of a man convicted of attempted sexual exploitation who he believed to be a 12-year-old child, along with the latest immigration enforcement efforts of Operation Take Back America. Finally, we'll conclude tonight with special report in Louisiana, where federal prosecutions announced major fraud, public corruption, healthcare fraud, pandemic loan fraud, tax fraud, and immigration-related prosecutions involving millions of taxpayer dollars. That's all coming up next in our final installment of the Federal Crime Report. I'm Haylee Ficuciello with Englebrook Independent News. Welcome back to the final installment of our Federal Crime Report. Tonight we're examining major federal prosecutions across the Great Plains and South Central United States. We concluded our report in Texas and Louisiana, where federal authorities announced major developments involving international narcotic trafficking, crimes against children, immigration enforcement, and complex financial fraud investigations. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Texas announced that a federal jury has convicted Webster Villano Echavarria, a 30-year-old Mexican citizen who had been residing in Atlanta, Georgia, of conspiracy to possessing with the intent to distribute methamphetamine and cocaine. The conviction followed a 5-day federal trial in Laredo. According to prosecutors, the conspiracy operated between June of 2019 and August of 2023, importing thousands of kilograms of methamphetamine and cocaine from Mexico through the World Trade Bridge port of entry in Laredo. Federal investigators estimated the organization imported approximately 10,460 kilograms of methamphetamine with an estimated street value of approximately $157 million. Evidence presented at trial linked investigators to multiple concealed shipments hidden inside legitimate commercial cargoes, including cauliflower, charcoal, and frozen strawberry puree. Authorities testified that the investigation began after officers intercepted more than 1,184 kilograms of methamphetamine and 51 kilograms of cocaine concealed in a shipment entering Laredo. Jurors also heard evidence that investigators connected Echavarria to numerous additional shipments designated to Georgia and other East Coast distribution networks. Prosecutors allege Echavarria used false online identities, frequently changed cellular telephones, and instructed co-conspirators to delete communication in effort to avoid detection. He remains in federal custody awaiting sentence before United States District Judge John A. Cousin, who had faced a possible sentence of life imprisonment. Federal prosecutors also announced that Robert Stephen Lerner, 41, has been sentenced to 151 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to coercion and enticement of a minor. Judge Marina Garcia Marajo ordered Lerner to serve 15 years of supervised release following his prison sentence and to register as a sex offender. According to court records, investigators identified Lerner during an online investigation involving a messaging application, Kik. Prosecutors say Lerner believed he was communicating with a father of a 12-year-old girl and repeatedly expressed his intent to engage in sexual activity with the child. Authorities arrested Lerner when he arrived at the Laredo area gas station where he believed the meeting would occur. Federal officials stated that proactive undercover operations remain an important tool in identifying individuals attempting to exploit children online before harm occurs. Federal prosecutors also announced continued immigration enforcement efforts as a part of Operation Take Back America. According to the Southern District of Texas, federal prosecutors filed 263 new immigration and border-related criminal cases during the reported period of July 24th through July 30th of 2026. Those cases include alleged human smuggling offenses, illegal re-entry, felony re-entry after prior removal, and other immigration and firearm-related cases. Among the defendants sought were Javier Vega Mirando, who was charged with felony illegal re-entry after authorities alleged he returned to the United States following his prior removal in 2021. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Luis Albanzo Umana, a Honduran national, to 46 months in federal prison after his 9th unlawful re-entry conviction. Court records cited prior convictions that include illegal re-entry, driving under the influence, and assault-related offense. Federal authorities said the prosecution involved coordination among multiple federal agencies, including Homeland Security Investigation, Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, U.S. Marshal Services, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm and Explosives. Federal prosecutors in the Western District of Louisiana announced a federal grand jury indictment charging Felicia Young, 58, of Lafayette, and Lieza Ficuciello, 59, with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Young also faces an obstruction justice charge. According to the indictment, prosecutors allege the defendants operated a year-long fraud scheme beginning in 2020. The indictment alleged Young established trust with victims throughout several businesses before requesting loans and falsified claims her financial accounts had been frozen. Prosecutors further allege Ficuciello falsified represented herself as a financial institution employee during calls with victims in order to reinforce those claims. According to the indictment, victims transferred at least $1.5 million through electronic payment platforms, checks, and cash transactions. Because this matter remains pending before court, the allegations have not been proven, and both defendants are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. The Department of Justice also highlights numerous fraud prosecutions across Louisiana involving allegations of pandemic relief fraud, healthcare fraud, tax fraud, public corruption, and misuse of federal funds. Among the cases highlighted, Amanda Claiborne Williams has been charged with wire fraud and tax evasion in connection with the alleged fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program and economic injury disaster loan application. Shimer Lawson Banker, a nurse practitioner, was sentenced to 87 months in federal prison in order to pay more than $1.5 million in restitutions following her conviction in healthcare fraud scheme involving medically unnecessary cancer genetic testing. Dr. Christopher Whipple was charged by indictment with the healthcare fraud involving alleged false claims submitted to Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance providers. 4 individuals from Zachary, Louisiana, were indicted in connection with the alleged theft involving federally funded educational programs. Oscar Hills IV was convicted of wire fraud and unlawful monetary transactions involving fraudulent pandemic loan applications and awaits sentencing. Damian Raby previously received 18-year federal prison sentence after his conviction in a money laundering and tax-related offense involving fraudulent employee retention credit claims. In Western District, 10 defendants were charged following an investigation in alleged fraudulent PPP and EIDL loan application. Jane Frances Pierce was indicted on charges including mail fraud and money laundering, filing false tax returns, and interfering with the IRS investigations. Krala Patel and 4 defendants pled guilty in a scheme involving fraudulent documentation submitted in support of immigration-related U.S. visa applications. Federal officials state that these prosecutions reflect continued cooperation among the Department of Justice, federal investigation agencies, and Louisiana state officials in addressing allegations of fraud involving taxpayer fund programs. That concludes this edition of the Federal Crime Report. This month's report highlights the broad scope of federal criminal enforcement, from child exploitation and violent crimes to international narcotic trafficking, immigration offenses, financial fraud, firearm violations, and public corruption investigations. Many of these cases were covered resulted in a lengthy federal prison sentence, while others remain in the judicial process. As always, individuals who have been charged but not convicted are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in the court of law. We'll continue following significant federal prosecutions from the United States District Courts across the nation and bring you the latest developments as they occur. For everyone here at Englebrook Independent News, thank you for joining us. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, Senior Correspondent for Englebrook Independent News. Have a safe evening and thank you for watching.